Today's daf we're going to be learning is Zevachim daf kuf zayin. A few short announcements. It's almost the end of the calendar year, so for those who want to get in donations before and join the circle of friends, we're more than invited. As I've mentioned before, we've increased our staff, we've increased our projects that we've been working on, including we just had yesterday an in-person meeting of teachers that we've been mentoring throughout the year. We have a group of two cohorts of teachers that were Gemara teachers in high schools in Israel to help kind of reshift the way people are thinking, how Gemara is being taught, helping them to share resources with each other. They've got great ideas, but often everybody works in their own sphere, and it's great to share ideas, to share challenges they're having with other people. So that's one project. As you saw this week, we're celebrating 6 years to the Siyum Hashas. We're heading toward the new, planning the Siyum Hashas. We have a year and a half left, even a little bit less. So your help is very much appreciated. What you can do to help support everything we're working on. Second, talking about other activities, we're having a meetup, going to a workshop, probably not to you, to a workshop for the breads of the Beit HaMikdash. It's filling up, but there's still a few spots available. So if anyone's interested in coming, it's on January 19th. The Hebrew one is on January 26th. They're both on Monday morning. And it's a great, really important way to understand how the Menachot work. Once you do that, it'll be much easier to understand the Masechet. And that's an opportunity. I know it's not for everybody because not everybody's in Israel and not everyone can take off a day of work. But if you can make it, it's a great, great, great opportunity. And the last announcement will be for the Siyum, that we have Dr. Malka Simkovich speaking, giving us a perspective of what it was like in the time of Bayit Sheni, how central the temple had a role in people's lives. That'll be really interesting. That Siyum is on Sunday, on the 11th of January. So please sign up. You'll get your Zoom link. And if you live in Israel or will be in Israel, there's a bunch of Siyumim happening in Hebrew around the country, also relating to our Masechet. Okay, we're going to get started. Enough announcements for today. We were learning yesterday. Okay, we started our topic with shchutei chutz. Okay, later today, sometime later in the afternoon, Alana Steinhain's Shiur is going to go up about this whole concept, which is basically going to be the topic of our entire chapter from here to Daf Kuf Yubet, about this concept of shchutei chutz, okay, offering sacrifices outside, which again, she always helps to give the perspective, the machshava, the thought behind what's going on here. We're dealing more with the technical, tedious, what exactly is, we spent a long time yesterday on, where exactly do we find the azhara, the prohibition for not slaughtering outside the temple. We had 3 possibilities, 2 were rejected. We ended with a third, which was gzera shava between hala'ah and shchita, right? Offering it and slaughtering it. They both say the same word. You didn't bring it to Ol Mo'eh, bring it, right? They each said it in a bit of a different way, hevi-o or yivienu, but both, it's the same phrase. So we learned, there's a warning by hala'ah, which actually was a pasuk in Dvarim, if you remember, which we're going to get to right now, so I may as well read it for you, which is ki im hamakom asher yivchar Hashem b'chad shvatecha sham ta'aleh olotecha v'sham ta'aseh et kol asher anochi mitzavecha. Right, in the place where I tell you, that's where you're going to do it. But I actually didn't read you the pasuk where it's the lo ta'aseh. Sorry, I'm just finding it. He shamer lecha. Right, that's actually the pasuk before I just read. He shamer lecha pen ta'aleh olotecha b'chol makom asher tireh. Right, asher tireh. Be forewarned not to, which we said is a lo ta'aseh, not to offer it anywhere you want. And then the continuation is, but the place I told you. Okay, now pay attention because in a minute we're going to darshan this. Sham ta'aleh lotecha v'sham ta'aseh kol asher anochi mitzavecha. We're going to darshan this pasuk a few times today. That's where you should do your hala'ah, and that's where you should do your other asiyot, other things you do there. We'll talk about that in 1 minute. But basically, the point is, there's a lo ta'aseh, so we can learn from gzera shava. It must also be for shchutei chutz. Rav Amar ked Rabbi Yonah. So starting now from the top of our daf, da Amar Rabbi Yonah. So Rabbi said, just like Rabbi Yonah said, at yasham sham. There's a gzera shava in that pasuk. Usually we make a gzera shava between 2 different pasukim. He says, look at that pasuk I just read to you in Devarim. It's chapter 12, verse 14. There you should offer up your offerings. And there you should do whatever I tell you. Now, what does do mean, asiyot? We've seen this before. Asiyot in the sacrifices mean sacrificial rites. Now, hala'ah is the burning of it, but the sacrificial rites are the slaughtering, the sprinkling the blood, collecting the blood. So what do they say here? Sham, one is referring to sham ta'aleh, that's la'alo, to put on the mizbech, on the altar. The other sham is the asiyot, ta'aseh, which includes shchita. So, ma lahalan. Now the verse that said the negative prohibition was specifically about olot, right? Pen ta'aleh olotecha. But from this Gzeira Shava we can learn, right? Ma lahalan lo anash elim kenisir. There was a punishment and there was also a warning. Afkan lo anash elim kenisir. So from the Gzeira Shava here between sham, this must include, there must be, just like there was a warning, there must be a warning here. In the end, it's kind of interesting because in the end, they never really find a pasuk with an actual warning. What they find is, in these two possibilities, is a Gzeira Shava that compares it to hala'ah. And that, by the way, if you remember, that explains that in the earlier Breita that started at the top of Amud Bet of yesterday's daf, when it said it was a Breita we brought for a different purpose, but it happened to mention there, where's the source for the warning for slaughtering? And it said, right, slaughtering in a case where it was both you sanctified it when it was forbidden, bamot were forbidden, and you offered it when bamot were forbidden, was hishamer lecha pen ta'aleh olotecha. Now we understand why they said that, because it's all really learned from the warning pasuk that actually references this is actually the one about offering it up, not about slaughtering, but because of the Gzeira Shava, we learn from there to ours. Okay, that was the end of that topic. Now we're going to go next section. We have a bunch of different sections today. Some of them connect back to each other. Eshkacha muktare pnim. Okay, we're going to learn a new term. Muktare pnim, muktare chutz. It's actually not really different than what we saw before. Muktar pnim means it's supposed to be burned inside, which means that it was slaughtered inside. So it's another way of saying it was slaughtered inside. It's just, it sounds complicated because they're talking about some other phrase, but it's the exact same phrase as before, which is, okay, we're going to go back to them. Okay, we're going to talk in a minute about muktare pnim, muktare chutz, but while I'm in the middle of this, let me just explain. We had two cases in the Mishna, if you remember. Tanakama and Rabbi Yosei Glili disagreed on one of them, which was, right, if you're shochet bifnim, you slaughtered it inside and offered it outside, you're definitely going to be obligated for offering it outside. But if you slaughtered it outside and then offered it outside, if you remember, there was a machloket, Rabbi Yosei Glili and Tanakama, whether you're chayav or not. Now, the rabbi said you are chayav. Rabbi Yosei Glili tried to say you already disqualified it, you're not chayav. And the rabbi said, what do you mean? Anytime you even just take it out, you disqualify it. So anytime you're offering it outside, it's already a disqualified offering, and therefore you're chayav. So we're going according to Tanakama right now. What they basically want to ask, I'm going to say it outside because the language just sounds a little complicated, but it's really not. They want to know what's the source for the rabbis, that if I offer it outside, if I slaughter it outside and then offer it outside, you're going to be liable. Where can I find a source for that? So the way they say it is like this. What we just proved in that whole long section, basically starting from when the Gemara started, was that muktare pnim, again, muktare pnim means I slaughtered it inside, and now it could potentially be offered inside. But instead of offering them inside, he'elam b'chutz, I offered them outside. That we have a pasuk for now. That was what we learned. The basic case of hala'at chutz, which is I offered it outside. Okay, this is what we learned in the very beginning, which is hishamer lecha pen ta'aleh olotecha. What does olotecha mean? The ones that were slaughtered properly, and now you want to offer them outside. But muktare chutz shehelam b'chutz minayin. But how do you know? Now, here's a weird phrase, because what they're talking about really is, what if you slaughtered it outside? But instead of saying slaughtered outside, they said, what could be burned outside? Now, actually, nothing could be burned outside. So it's a very strange language, and it doesn't really make much sense that they use this language. But all it really means is, it was slaughtered outside, and therefore can't be offered inside. Let's put it that way, okay? So it's called the things that are burned outside, but nothing's really burnt outside, so you just have to deal with the fact that the language is weird. So anyway, the question is, how do we learn that something that was slaughtered outside and then you offered it on the altar outside, you're going to be liable? So Amar Rav Kahana, Amar Kra, Va'alehen Toma. So we're going to have, by the way, just to give you the structure, three answers to this question. Then we're going to have a difficulty, it's a bit of a lack of clarity about which opinions he's actually raising a difficulty on. Some people say number 2 and number 3. Some people say just number 3. Okay, but he's going to raise a difficulty. So the first thing is going to darshan, and this one actually is going to be rejected right away. Okay? The first one. So I should have said it better. There's three answers. The first one's rejected. Then there's a difficulty raised on either the second and the third, or maybe just on the third. Alehem tomau. So now, where's this pasuk? This pasuk is, if you remember, there are two sections, which even the first section we said maybe splits into two. That was yesterday, about maybe one is sanctified when it was forbidden and offered when it was forbidden, and slaughtered when it was forbidden, or maybe sanctified when it was actually permitted, but then only slaughtered when it was forbidden. Okay, but that's the whole first section, all about slaughter. Then we start and that's to Aaron, his sons, and to all the Jewish people. Then it says, what if, right, you offer it outside, and it starts to say. Now, in that section, it starts off with a very strange introduction. It says, okay, we're in Pasuk, Perek Yud Zayin of Vayikra 17, verse 8. Va'alehem tomal, and to them say, Ish ish mi be Yisrael, min ager agar asher yagor b'tochem asher yaleh olau zevach. Okay, so now it says, and speak to those people saying the following. Now, alehem means the people, I guess we spoke to in the previous section. Now, what's weird about this pasuk is it should be elehem. Okay, in Hebrew grammar, that's the proper way to say it. Elehem tomar, to them say. But alehem with an aleph is kind of like to them, but it's a very strange language. You usually say elechem. So what does the Gemara say here? Or the Rav Kahana, he says va'alehem tomal. He reads it as ve'alehem, on them, meaning with an ayin. And what that means is, what's on them? Now, we thought it was referring to the people. Alehem tomal. It's alehem, on those things, ala smuchin tomal. On the things we said before. Okay, now we're going to say like this. We just discussed shkutei chutz. So now, relating to things that were slaughtered outside, you're going to be liable if you offer them outside. Okay? So basically what that's doing is it's saying, and this section is referring back to the previous section. And there you have that. You're going to be liable if you slaughtered them outside and then you offered them outside. But the Gemara doesn't like this. Matkefla Rabbi says, what are you talking about? Mikti va'alehem tiv. Doesn't say alehem with an ayin. Then you could say what you want to say, right? On them. But alehem means to them. To them is to the people. So you got it wrong because you're basically changing ayins to olives to ayins, which doesn't make any sense, even though there are people who do that. And there are places where we've darshan like that. But he doesn't like it. And now we're going to go to another one. Ella kedetana debei Rabbi Yishmael ve'alehem tomal. He says the same words, but notice he's focusing on the vav and alehem tomar. We've done this a lot also. La rev parshiot. That when you have a vav that connects, what it's basically saying is, oh, and this connects to that. So this builds on that previous section, and that's the vav. Okay, some people call this in the commentaries later when they start figuring out who is the person, and they have this disagreement about, is it raising a difficulty on this and the next one, or only on the next one? They talk about this as a hekesh. It's a type of juxtaposition. These two are juxtaposed, and there's a vav between them. That makes them the same. Okay, now they say, third explanation, Rabbi Yochanan Amar, hava'a. Goes back to the Gzeir Shava we ended with yesterday. Both have the same language in it, shkutei chutz and hala'at chutz. So ma lahala muktarei chutz, afka muktarei chutz. Just like in the first section, it's referring to things that were slaughtered outside and therefore can't really be offered outside, but definitely can't be offered inside. So also here, it could also be referring to things that weren't slaughtered properly. And that's the other source. Okay, so he uses the Gzeir Shava. So if we say it like this, second answer uses a hekesh, this one uses the Gzeir Shava. Matkefla Rav Bivi. Now here comes the disagreement about what exactly he's arguing about. Both the hekesh and the Gzeir Shava, or maybe just the Gzeir Shava. What he presumes is, and this is why it's not so clear, would you count these as two separate things or one? Right? We now have two cases. One is offering something that was slaughtered inside and offering something that was slaughtered outside. And we learned it either by a hekesh, a juxtaposition, or by Gzeir Shava. And perhaps if you learn it only from one of them, you get to this conclusion, or maybe both, and that's really where the difficulty rises, in understanding his difficulty. But let's just assume both right now. Whether you learn from a hekesh or whether you learn from Gzeir Shava, you now learn that this pasuk references two different prohibitions. If it references two different cases. So if it references two different cases, offering something that was slaughtered inside and offering something that was slaughtered outside, then it should be listed as two different cases where the first Mishna in Kratot okay, which is a Masechet all about when you get karet. And the first Mishnah describes 36 cases where you get karet. And if you do it unwittingly, you have to bring a sin offering. So Rabbi says, there's 36 cases in the Torah. Well, if you count this as two, which you should, if you learn it by Gzera Shava, and perhaps even if you learn it by juxtaposition, there are two different Isurim, Tlatim B'Shev Havyan. There should be 37. Ti'ika Hama'aleh, because you have a Ma'aleh in this case and you have a Ma'aleh in that case. You have two different cases of someone who offers it outside, depending on what happened in the first stage. So, kasha. In fact, that's a difficulty. So now we've raised a difficulty with perhaps even all of the opinions of what the source is. Okay, but now we're going to move on. For this, we're going to move on and jump ahead. Okay, what the Mishnah is going to do, what the Gemara is going to do now is jump ahead first to the next Mishnah, and then the truth is, I didn't check. I think it's all like the next one in order. Actually, it's not the next one, but they're going to jump to a further Mishnah. Okay, on Daf Kuf Yud, and then they're going to. I think it's on Kuf Yud. And then they're going to jump to another Mishnah later. Okay, they're going to jump ahead to two other Mishnayot, which discuss other things that are done outside. Okay, as I said, this whole chapter is dealing with things that are done outside the Azara and what the source is for both of them. So the first one is sprinkling the blood outside, which makes sense that we're going there next because that's the main part of the korban. So v'haditznan, the fact that it says in the Mishnah, hazorek miktsat damim bachutz chayav. Even if you just do a little bit of the blood, meaning you do one placement of blood, let's say you're supposed to do 4, and you do one placement of blood outside, you're going to be chayav. Minalam, where do we get that from? It doesn't say anywhere in the psukim anything about sprinkling the blood. So for this, we're going to have a machloket, Rabbi Yishmael and Rabbi Akiva. And then we're going to do the classic ping pong between them. Because this one's going to learn from that pasuk, that one's going to learn from that pasuk, and then we're going to say, oh, what does he do with that pasuk? And then we're going to go off on a whole long ping pong. If you use that pasuk for that, where does the other one learn that halacha from? Because he doesn't have that pasuk to learn it from. Do a whole ping pong, and then we're going to go back and say, where does the other one do with the pasuk of the other one? So that's going to be a whole long section today. So it says, Hazorek miksat damim bachutz chayav. Minalam, where do we get it from? Nafkalemi detanya. Okay, from the following Breita. And in the following Breita, we're going to see the two opinions of Rabbi Yishmael and Rabbi Akiva. Dam yechashev l'rabot hazorek divrei Rabbi Yishmael. Rabbi Yishmael says, do you remember in the pasuk of okay, we read them yesterday? It talks about slaughtering outside. It says, if you didn't bring your korban and slaughter it in Ol Moed, okay, the slaughtering part, this is in the first section, dam yechashev la'ishahu, this will be considered like blood. It's as if you spilled blood. Why are they mentioning blood in this pasuk? Oh, it must be, right? It is a little strange that the blood was mentioned here. And they say you spill blood. So they say, dam yechashev, that means also if you sprinkle the blood outside, you're liable. So he basically finds the prohibition for sprinkling the blood within the prohibition of slaughtering. It's going to be important for a later sugya today. So keep that in your head. Rabbi Akiva Omer, O Zavach, l'rabot et hazorek. Now he quotes a pasuk in the section of Hala'at chutz, not shchutei chutz. So keep this in mind. Rabbi Yishmael is learning it from the psukim about shchita, slaughtering, and Rabbi Akiva is learning it from the psukim, right, from pasuk ched and on, about offering them up outside. Where does he learn it? So in the first pasuk there it says, Alehem Tomar, the one we just read, Ish ish mibeit Yisrael min hager asher yigor b'tochaim. If there's someone among you who does this, asher ya'aleh ola o zavach. If they offer an ola or a zavach, which usually when it's next to ola means a shlamim. Now, why does it say this or that? Why is the word or there? Oh, or is usually a word that we say if it's really not necessary. It's including something additional. What's it including? Also the zorek. So not only if you offer it outside, also if you sprinkle the blood outside. Okay, so now we're going to start. Rabbi Yishmael, hi o zavach ma'avidle. What does he do with the o? Very simply, lechalek, to distinguish. What is o or generally used for? To say this or that. Okay, another way of saying it is we need it for the simple reading. Because what does it say? If you offer an ola, let's say you just said ola v'zevach. That's what you would say instead of or, you would say and. Well, if it says if you offer an ola, a burnt offering, and a shlamim, maybe you would say you're not going to be chayav until you offer 2 offerings. 1 ola, 1 shlamim. Otherwise, maybe you're not liable for hala'at chutz. So you need the O there, according to Rabbi Yishmael, to say it's this or that. Otherwise, you wouldn't know that. Rabbi Akiva, so where does he learn the chalek? Okay, he doesn't think that, right? He thinks the O is not necessary, but he also doesn't think that Ola and Zevach, you have to offer two. Well, he's going to learn that you have to offer only one from another word in this section. Rabbi Akiva lechalek minale. Where does he learn this from? This starts our ping pong, because if Rabbi Yishmael uses the O for something else, well, where does Rabbi Akiva learn that from? Well, he learns it from naftalemi lo yavienu. Remember, it says, and you didn't bring it to all moed. Lo yavienu means you didn't bring it. It is singular. Lo yavienu. That means it, one and not two. Okay, Rabbi Yishmael, what does he do with lo yavienu? Okay, if he doesn't need it, lechalek, to say it's only one, he learned that from the O, so what does he do with the word yavienu? Rabbi Yishmael, he doesn't mean lo yavienu as bring one. Lo yavienu means bring it in a complete form. If you bring it partial, not complete, it's actually a big machloket what it means not complete. I'm not going to leave that aside right now, just so you know. But if you offer a not complete offering outside, you're actually not liable. And that's what he learns from, if you didn't bring it to all moed, meaning if you brought it outside, but it in its complete form. Okay, even though it might not necessarily mean in its complete form, but there's a machloket about that. Okay, but let's just go with the opinion that says, if it's missing something, okay, and it's not complete, you're not obligated. Okay, where's Rabbi Akiva going to learn that from? He needs to learn that halacha, we assume. Rabbi Akiva naftalemi la'asot oto. Okay, right after the words lo yavienu, it says, you don't bring it la'asot oto, to do it. Again, you have an it, oto. So he learns it from oto. Now, according to Rabbi Yishmael, you have also oto, and you have also yavienu. They both seem to say the same thing. It needs to be complete. So what does he do with both? Why do you have two? Okay, what's the obvious answer according to Rabbi Yishmael? That one time it's mentioned, we're basically going to say they're both for the same halacha, that you're not going to be obligated if it's not complete. But one is if you slaughtered it inside and offered it outside, and one is if you slaughtered it outside and offered it outside. And in both cases, if it's not complete, then you're not liable. To which we're now going to finally end this part of the ping pong. Before we get there, we're just going to prove that Rabbi Yishmael also uses la sototo to teach this halacha, and that specifically it's teaching one of these two cases. V'hatanya, here's a braita to prove it. Rabbi Yishmael omer, yachol muktarei pnim shechaslu ve'elu b'chutz chayav. You might have thought if it was slaughtered inside and offered outside, you're liable. And missing something. Okay, so if you slaughter it inside and then it's not complete when you offer it outside, you might have thought you're liable. Talmud lomar la'asot oto ala shalem chayav ve'eno chayav ala chasir. So what do we see here? La'asot oto is specifically coming to teach you about one that was slaughtered inside and offered outside, which means that yavienu would be free to teach you one that was slaughtered outside and offered outside. Okay, and that just proves the way we explain Rabbi Yishmael's opinion. Because again, Rabbi Yishmael doesn't say this. We're just putting words in his mouth. But what he does say is what appears in this braita that we just read. So there we see that what we were suggesting, he said, actually seems to work. End of this section now, or part of this section. We're going to close off at least one part. Rabbi Akiva, muktarei pnim shechasru ve'ala b'chutz chayav. He actually thinks that if you slaughtered it inside and offered it outside, and it's when you offer it, it's missing a part, you're actually liable. Okay? So in that case, he thinks you're liable. So therefore, he doesn't need that pasuk, and thus ends the ping pong in this direction. So I say in this direction because we started this ping pong from what does Rabbi Yishmael do with O? And from there, we got into all these other things because we had to say, oh, he learned something else. And then Rabbi Akiva learned it. And then what does Rabbi Yishmael do with that? Yeah, and then we kept going back. Now we have to go back to the beginning because Rabbi Yishmael had said, right, we're learning it from dam yechashev. So now the question is going to be, what does Rabbi Akiva do with dam yechashev? So now we have to start a new ping pong, which is going to be a little shorter. But what does Rabbi Akiva do with dam yechashev? So Rabbi Akiva, hi dam yechashev my avidle. What does he do with it? L'rabot shchitat ha'of. Now remember, it's in the section about slaughtering. He doesn't think it's talking about a different action like zrika. What does he say? Oh, it says if you slaughter outside, you're liable because you've spilled blood. Now that means what else is going to be included in that? Not only slaughtering an animal, because it said shor kesef oez, but also slaughtering a bird. Okay, because a bird has blood when you slaughter it, as opposed to, let's say, a mincha, where you do the kometz, doesn't cause blood to come out. Okay, if you come to the workshop, you'll see there's no blood there. Okay, right? We're not doing sacrifices. It's not blood, but right, it's just but slaughtering a bird has blood. Okay, so now Rabbi Yishmael can't learn from Dam Yechashev because he uses that pasuk for Hazarek Dam. So Rabbi Yishmael, where's he going to learn it from? Nafkalimi o asher yishchat. Okay, this is the pasuk. Ish ish b'beit Yisrael asher yishchat shor o kesef o ez b'machaneh o asher yishchat michutz lamachaneh. Or he does it outside. He slaughters it outside the machaneh. So why do you have to add this or? To teach you there's another kind of shechita, not just animals, also birds. Rabbi Akiva Amar Lacha Hahu. He says, what do you mean? You need O for something else. You can't learn that. O means, I'll tell you what it means in a second. Hahu mebayale, and as it says, or you slaughter. Why does it have to repeat the word, or you slaughter? Mebayale ala shochetu chayav v'lo ala molek. This is very interestingly. Remember Malika? Malika is the way you slaughter the birds in the temple. It's not slaughtering. It's just the way you kill them in the temple is called Malika. It's kosher. Inside, actually, you do shechita inside for a bird, it's not kosher. If you ever do malika outside the temple, it's not kosher. So each has its place. So now they say, what do you chayav when you do with the bird outside the temple? Only shechita, because it says, o asher yishchat. So we've included the bird from a different phrase. And now when it gets to the o asher yishchat, Rabbi Akiva comes and says, right, because remember, he learns it from Dam Yechashev. Or you slaughter, meaning you're only liable for a bird if you actually slaughter it outside, not if you do malika outside. If you do malika outside, you're actually not chayav, which actually you would have thought. And in a minute, we're going to say that. But right now, we're here. Okay, where does Rabbi Yishmael get it from? He needs a pasuk. He's using that pasuk, o asher yishchat, to explain the whole idea of a bird that is included in this prohibition. Where does he get that you're not chayav in malika? Nafkalimi zeh hadavar. Okay, in the first pasuk there, it says, banav ve'el kol bnei Yisrael v'amarta lehem zeh hadavar asher tzivah Hashem lemor. This is what I'm telling you. This meaning I'm talking about slaughtering, only slaughtering, nothing else. Titanya. Now, how do we know Rabbi Yishmael says this? Because again, we're just suggesting, but now we have a proof, just like we did before. Asher yishchat ein li ela shochet behema. Okay, it's asher yishchat because it says shor kesef oez. So we only have animals. Shachat of minala. Where do you get bird? Talmud lamar o asher yishchat. That's what we said before. The name of Rabbi Yishmael, right? O asher yishchat comes to include birds. Yachol afa molek. You might have thought also if you do malika to a bird outside. And I told you it's logical, and we're going to hear the logic right now. Vidinu, it's very logical. Mashchita de'ein derech hechshera b'fnim chayav. If on shchita of a bird you're going to be chayav, even though if you did that action inside the temple, it wouldn't be good, right? The whole idea of offering outside is you're doing what you should have done inside, outside. But shchita of a bird is not what you should have done inside. And if you do it outside, you're liable. So malika, shederech hechshera b'fnim, so malika, since that's the way to do it inside, and you now do it outside, wouldn't you think enodin shu chayav? Wouldn't you think you'd be liable? Talmud lamar zeh hadavar. That's why it says zeh hadavar. Okay, zeh hadavar comes to tell you, no, just shchita. Okay, so that's the Braita that just proved what we said in the name of Rabbi Yishmael. Now, just one second. It starts here with the Tanya. Right. Here, by the way, it doesn't say it in the name of Rabbi Yishmael, but we're just assuming it's from the school of Rabbi Yishmael because it fit everything we just said. Rabbi Akiva, so now we just have to go back to the ping pong. We have to finish up the ping pong. So Rabbi Yishmael said zeh hadavar. What does Rabbi Akiva do with zeh hadavar? Rabbi Akiva amar lecha u'mebayale l'gzeira shava. He needs it for something completely different. Zeh hadavar appears here. Zeh hadavar appears in Nidarim. They learn some halachot from here to Nidarim, from Nidarim back to here. I'm not going to get into that right now, just so we finish the daf in time. Okay. And it's not so connected to our issue. So what we did so far in the daf, just to get your structure, we finished up. Where's the warning for shchutei chutz, right? The warning pasuk. We then moved to, we got slaughtered out inside, offered outside. Where's the proof? What pasuk do we learn that what Tanakama said against Rabbi Yossi Aglili, that if it's offered outside, if it's slaughtered outside and then offered outside, you're going to be liable as well. We brought 3 sources, but had some issues with either all or most of them. Then we moved to this upcoming Mishna about Hazarek. If you sprinkle the blood, you're also chayav. What's the source for that? Machlok at Rabbi Yishmael, Rabbi Akiva. And then we had to just deal with how do they each read the rest of the psukim. Then we're going to move to another Mishna. Same idea, but here we're going to see a Mishna where you're actually not liable for doing this action outside. Haditnan ha-kometz. If you take out the kometz, okay, which is you put your three fingers into the dough of the mincha and take out a kometz, and that's the part you're supposed to put on the altar. If you do that action of taking the kometz outside the temple, or mekabel damim, or you accept the blood, not that you slaughter it, not that you sprinkle the blood, you just accept the blood. Outside, patur, you're exempt. Minalan. Yours going to be a kind of funny answer. Where do we get that you're exempt? So the Gemara responds and says, where do you get that you're obligated? As normally, in order to say you're obligated, there has to be some sort of pasuk. There's no pasuk here, so obviously you're exempt. Now, with the Zrika, we said there's no pasuk, but let's find one. But here they say, why would you look for it, right? We know it's patur, so what's to look for? There's nothing in the Torah about it. Great. There's no prohibition. Kind of funny question, right? That they're asking in the first place. Well, the Gemara says no, because you might have teti mishchita. You might have said we could derive it from slaughtering. If slaughtering is forbidden, then maybe hakometz v'makabel damim would be forbidden. They say no, because shchita has a unique stringency, and you wouldn't be able to learn from there. Ma l'shchita sheken nifselet shelo la'ochlim bepesach. If you slaughter, remember Pesach has to be slaughtered for the intent of a group. Let's say you slaughter for a group of people that none of them can eat the Pesach. They're all sick or old, no sense they can't eat. So if you do that, the slaughtering is invalid. So that's a unique stringency for shchita, and that's why we couldn't learn from there to hakometz or hamekabel dami. Like if you did those for the sake of people who couldn't eat, you wouldn't be disqualified. Tetim is zrika. Maybe you could learn from zrika, though. Maybe that was why we have to look for a source. But if a non-Kohen does it, he gets the death penalty. I think it's death by the hands of God, but he's supposed to be killed. Now, you don't get that if a non-Kohen, now a Kohen's supposed to do kometz and a Kohen's supposed to do the Kabbalat Hadran, but you're not punished by death. So Zrika is much more severe, so you wouldn't have thought to learn from there to our case. So far we're okay. We don't really need a source because you couldn't have learned it from Shlita, you couldn't have learned it from Zrika. Turning now to Amud Bet, Tita mi benaya. Well, maybe you can learn from a combination of the two. Because that's how we do, right? When we do these kavachomers, we say, well, if that stringency doesn't exist, right? The stringency of shchita doesn't exist in Zrika. The stringency of Zrika doesn't exist in shchita. So maybe from the combination, you could have learned to hakometz and mekabel tadamim. But they say there's no such thing really here as learning from a combo. How do we know? And they're going to prove it from the previous sugya about Zrika. Because in Ken, lo yomar b'Zrika. Now, Zrika was clear we had a pasuk. Now, it wasn't the most clear pasuk, but we had some pasuk which referenced Zrika, dam yechashev, right? Or o. We had something. Now, if you could learn from a combination of the two, then theoretically you could have learned Zrika from shchita and hala'ah combined. What they're going to basically say, I'll read it inside in a minute, but the fact that we needed a pasuk for Zrika and we didn't learn it from a combination of those two shows that we don't learn from combinations of two in this case. Because if we could have done a combination, that would have been a perfect combination to learn from the two of those to Zrika. And the fact that the Torah went and gave us some sort of warning pasuk about it shows that you can't learn from two. And if you can't learn from two, then you can't learn from it to kmitza, right, to the kometz or the mekabel damim, the one who accepts the blood. And therefore, there's no reason to think there's any liability here, and therefore that's the answer to the question. How do we know they're exempt? Because there's no pasuk saying that they're liable. So that's what we're going to read right now, and they're going to go through how you could have learned from shchita and hala'ah together, right? Slaughtering and offering it up on the altar. How could you have learned from them together? We'll see right now. In Ken lo yomar b'Zrika v'tetemi benayu. So you should have not said it by Zrika if there was such a thing that you could learn from the two, and you would have learned it from the combination. Now, how? Well, let's start from the beginning, just like we did 2 minutes ago. Teti mishchita, let's try to learn it from shchita by itself. Can't learn from shchita to Zrika because it has a stringency. Ma l'shchita sheken nifselet shelo l'shem ochlim b'Pesach. Because on Pesach, if you slaughter it for people who can't eat, it's disqualified. Titi mehala'ah, maybe you could learn from offering it, the fact that it's forbidden to offer it outside the temple. Maybe you learn also the blood. But ma l'hala'ah sheken yeshna b'mincha. Hala'ah exists in more cases than Zrika. Zrika only exists in animals or birds. But hala'ah, offering it outside, exists even in a mincha offering. And obviously there's no blood in a mincha offering, like we said. So Zrika is only, right, in limited cases, and hala'ah is more strict because it applies to more cases. So you can't learn from hala'ah by itself. However, titi mi benayu, but you could have learned it from the combination of the two because each one doesn't have the chumrah of the other. So, although theoretically, also shlita, right, exactly. Shlita also there isn't in a mincha. So they each don't have the chumrah of the other. And therefore they say, lahachi kataf kra, therefore there is a pasuk by Zrika to teach you, lemeimar de lo atami benaya. You can't use this combination to learn the Isser here, the prohibition for Zrika, and therefore you can't use it to learn for kometz or mekabelet adam, the one who either takes the handful or does the accepting of the blood outside the temple. If you did that, you're not liable kari because there's no way you could have learned it. Okay, and the Zrika proves it. Now we're going to go back to Rabbi. So what we did right now, we learned the proof text for Zrika, and then we tried to learn where's the proof that you're not going to be liable if you do the kometz or accepting of the blood outside. And we basically said, well, there's no source whatsoever. Now we're going to go back to the Zrika. And I mentioned that you should pay attention to this because we're going to come back to it, but I'll say it again. Rabbi Yishmael learned it from Dam Shafach, right? That the person kind of spilled blood. That means it includes also it's forbidden to sprinkle the blood. That was in the section of slaughtering outside. Rabbi Akiva's pasuk was from the O Zavach, right? Or is in the section of Hala'ah. And therefore comes Rabbi Avahu and says the following: Shachat vizarak. What if a person didn't know any of this was forbidden for God, okay? And slaughtered and sprinkled the blood. So he says, the derive Rabbi Yishmael, where the prohibition for sprinkling the blood is learned from the psukim about shchita, so chayav achad, you're only liable one. This is like if you have a tolada that connects with an av, right? You're only going to be obligated one because it's all within the same av malacha. This is all within the same prohibition, okay? Right, that was in Shabbat with melachot. Okay, that was all within the same prohibition. It all comes from one place. So you're only chayav one korban chatat. But l'divrei Rabbi Akiva, who learns zrika from offering it outside and not slaughtering it outside, would say there's two, because shchita comes from one prohibition and offering it outside comes from a different prohibition. And therefore zrika, which comes from offering it outside, if you did shchita and zrika, you're going to be chayav two. Abaye disagrees and says, no. And he's going to darshan this pasuk, this other pasuk we saw earlier today. Abaye amal, afilu l'divrei Rabbi Akiva, eino chayav el echad. Even according to Rabbi Akiva, you're only chayav one. To Amar Kra, Sham ta'aseh. Okay, remember that pasuk in Dvarim. What did it say? Im b'makom asher yivchar Hashem be'echad shvatecha. Right, you can't offer if the first pasuk said, "Lest you offer it outside." You can't do that. Okay, because you have to offer it. Ki im makom asher yivchar Hashem, in the place God chooses, namely the temple. Sham ta'ale olotecha. That's where you should offer your sacrifices. V'sham ta'aseh kol asher nochi b'tzavcha. And that's where you should do. Now, you might remember earlier in the Masechet we had asiyot here. Doing means the actions of the sacrificial rites, which include shchita and zrika, right? Also kabbalah and holacha. But it also includes shchita and zrika. What does this pasuk do, basically, according to Abaye? It puts all the asiyot as one action. Shchita and zrika are like one action. Even though the proof for zrika comes from a pasuk about offering it outside, burning it. But because it says Sham Ta'aseh, Katuv Asan Kulan Lavada Achad, it's as if it's one action. Okay, so we have a machloket, are you chayav two or one, right, for according to Rabbi Akiva. What if Zarak Ve'ela? Now it's going to be the reverse. If you do Zrika and also offering outside, but let's say you slaughter it inside, how many are going to be chayav? So the different Rabbi Yishmael, obviously chayav shtayim, because the whole proof for Zrika comes from Shchita. So it's like you did, right, the prohibition of Shchita and the prohibition of offering it outside. L'divrei Rabbi Akiva eno chayav el echad, because according to Rabbi Akiva, the proof pasuk is from, right, the source for Zrika comes from Hala'ah, so it's all one. But again, Abaye disagrees, and what does he say? No, Zrika and Hala'ah are two separate things. So where does he prove it from? That same pasuk we just talked about. Afilu l'divrei Akiva chayav shtayim, lahachi palginu kra, sham ta'aleh v'sham ta'aseh. He says, look at that pasuk, it says, that's where you should offer it, that's where you should do everything, your actions. So what does it show? Hala'ah is one thing, and Zrika is a different thing, because Zrika is involved in all the actions. So you end up with why the pasuk split them into two categories, to show they're two different categories, two different prohibitions. So again, we have a machloket Abaye Rabbi Avahu about what would Rabbi Akiva say, how many would he obligate? Here it's the opposite though. Rabbi Avahu thought it was two, and he said it's only one. I'm sorry, did I say that? No. Rabbi Avahu thought it was one, and Abaye said it's two. Okay, now, Shachat v'zarak v'he'ala l'divrei hakol chayav shtayim. But if you did shchita, zrika, and ha'ala, everybody would think you're chayav two, because either which way, you're going to have a combination of two. Tanu Rabbanan. Now we're going to start a new braita. And here we're going to talk about this pasuk, which I had some trouble translating yesterday. The psukim where it talks about offering them outside, it says, okay, in Shchita, the first pasuk, really, pasuk gimel, ish ish b'beit Yisrael sheishchat shor or kesef o ez b'machaneh, in the camp. Now, in the camp sounds like in the Azarah, right? But of course, right, it's going to talk about what's forbidden. If you slaughter it in the camp or o asher yishchat, which we darshan today, michutz lamachaneh, or outside the camp. And then it says, ve'el petach ol moed lo avio. Now, you have three things that are basically all saying the same thing, which is you can't do it in the machaneh or outside the machaneh, which we're going to have to assume. In the machaneh is weird, right? That's why I struggled to translate it, because in the machaneh sounds like in the inner machaneh, but obviously there you can do it. So it's just weird. We have to understand what that means. In the machaneh or outside the machaneh, you can't do it, and you have to bring it into ol moed. Now, a lot of these are really unnecessary, and we're going to darshan this right now. There's a bunch of girsa problems, okay? So it could be your Gemara looks like different wording than I have, but I'm going to read according to what I have here. Michutz lamachaneh. Now, when it says outside the camp, you can't do it outside the camp. What might you have thought based on our earlier sugya? Yachol, from last chapter, Yachol chutz l'shalosh machanot. Maybe it's like the Purim and Israfim, right? That it's only outside Jerusalem is it going to be prohibited, which we know it's not. Minayin af b'machaneh leviyah. How do we know? Even, right? You have to do it. Even outside the Azarah, it's prohibited. Talmud lomar b'machaneh. Oh, the b'machaneh means outside the Azarah, but not outside all three machanot. That's why it says b'machaneh or michutz lamachaneh, to teach you chutz lamachaneh would have just taught us outside all three. So this is saying, right, as long as you're outside the Azarah, it's a problem. B'machaneh, wait, but if it just said b'machaneh, now, and the question is that once you say just b'machaneh, you would have known outside one machaneh. So why do you need michutz lamachaneh? Well, yachol hashochet ola b'darom yechayav. You might have thought b'machaneh means in the camp, meaning even in the Azarah you could be liable. How would you be liable? Let's say you slaughter one of those kochim in the south. You have to slaughter it in the north. Maybe just slaughtering it in the wrong place in the Azarah gets you this prohibition of shkutei chutz, of slaughtering it outside. Talmud lomar o michutz lamachaneh. Okay, that's why it has to say or michutz lamachaneh, because it wants to tell you no, it really has to be outside. And what does it mean chutz lamachaneh? You can't slaughter anything outside the Azarah. So you're not going to be chayav shchutei chutz if you did it in a place where theoretically you could bring sacrifices there. You can't bring sacrifices outside you can offer sacrifices in the south side of the Azarah as long as you sacrifice kochim kalim. So you're not going to be chayav shchutei chutz unless it's more similar to chutz lamachaneh where nothing can be sacrificed. Well, this is going to lead us to a big machloket by Ula and Rava. Amar Ula. Hashochet al gago shalecha chayav. I'm going to remind you, the Azarah was an open courtyard. But in the Azarah was the sanctuary, the heichal, and that had a roof on it. It was covered. The roof of the sanctuary you can't use for sacrifice. It's not a place for sacrificing, even though technically speaking it's within the Azarah. So comes Ula and says, okay, so if you slaughter on the roof of the heichal, chayav, you're going to be chayav because what did we just define? If it's not a place where sacrifices can be brought, then you're liable. Now we get to the third one. Why does it say al petach ol moed? Rava says, if not to say, right, we already got everything. If it's not a way for a korbanot, right, it has to be a place that you can't do korbanot at all. So that gets us outside. But what about the heichal, the roof of the heichal, which you can't do slaughtering either? Well, the words al petach ol moed means you have to bring it into petach ol moed. That's a place where you can slaughter it. Meaning, lamali, lav lemiute gago, doesn't it come to tell you, Rabbi says, that I could do it in the roof, because as long as I go into ol moed, I'm good. And heichal is within ol moed, right? Even the roof of it. So even though it's not a place that's ra'oi, theoretically, if I slaughter it there, I wouldn't be liable. So they have a machloka whether you be liable or not. So now they're going to question Rava. The Rava, so wait a minute. If that's what you're saying, the whole difference is, are you inside the Azarah or outside? All it needed to say was if you didn't bring it to Ol Moed, and then you'd know, as long as I brought it to Ol Moed, I'm fine, including the roof. If I'm outside, it's not fine. So then you don't even need the machaneh, b'machaneh, michutz machaneh at all. So b'machaneh, michutz machaneh lamali, it must be coming to include some other case that's prohibited, because that's the part that talks about don't do it there. Is it not la tuye gago? Is it not to include even the roof? To which Amar of Mary, no. That you could say is coming to include something else, and therefore we don't have a difficulty on Rava. La tuye kula b'fni v'tzavara b'chutz. What if the animal is completely inside, but the neck is outside? And that's coming to say that's called outside the camp. So the Gemara says, okay, that's ridiculous. That's obviously outside the camp. Tzavara b'chutz pshita. Amai kapi rachmana shchita. Ushchita b'chutzi. If the whole animal's inside, but the neck is outside, and you slaughter it outside, of course that's shchutei chutz. You slaughter it outside. The whole thing is dependent on the slaughter. So they say, okay, what it really means is la tuye kula b'chutz v'tzavara b'fnim. The opposite case. What if the animal is completely outside, meaning the majority of the animal is outside, but the head is inside and you did the slaughtering inside? You might think that's okay. No, it's not okay. The reason why it says b'machaneh michutz l'machaneh is problematic is to include even this case and having nothing to do with the roofs, and therefore Rava could stand. Okay, so we have a machloket Ula and Rava about the roof. Itmar. Now we have two machlokot of Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish. The first one is hamaleh b'zman hazeh. If you offer a sacrifice outside the area where the Azara used to be, nowadays, are you liable or not? Rabbi Yochanan amar chayav, Rish Lakish amar patur. It's machloket Rabbi Yochanan Rish Lakish. Rabbi Yochanan amar chayav, he says you're liable. Why? Kedusha rishona, remember this machloket? Kidsha l'sha'atav kidsha lati lavo. The first sanctification of the temple, the kedusha stayed, remains there forever. That means if the kedusha is still there, then the prohibition is still in existence. Rish Lakish amar patur, kedusha rishona kidsha l'sha'atav lo kidsha lati lavo. He says it's temporary. Once the destruction happened, there's no more sanctity there. If there's no more sanctity, well, then there's no sanctified space, which means you can do it anywhere you want, or you won't be obligated for doing it somewhere else. Now, let's suggest, although we're going to reject it, that this is the same machlok at the Rabbi Lezer and Rabbi Yishmael. It's not in a Mishna in Eduyot, where they come and they testify about things they know, they learned by tradition. Amar Rabbi Lezer. When they were building the second temple, they put up curtains in the sanctuary when they were building the wall of the sanctuary, and curtains in the Azara when they were building the walls of the Azara. There was one minor difference. In the Hechal, they put the curtains on the outside. On the inside, and put the wall outside. In the Azara, they would build inside, and the curtains went outside. Okay, that's a separate thing that we're not going to get into today. Amar Rabbi Yeshua, Shamati shayu makrivim afa pishein bayit ochlim kochikochim afa pishein klaim, and kochim kalim maser sheni afa pishein choma mipnei shekdusha v'shana kichal shatav kichal latilevo. He says you didn't need the curtains because, okay, the assumption is that Rabbi Lezer thought you need the curtains to designate a space. They wanted sacrifice so badly. They didn't want to wait till it was built. So they put up a curtain as if to function as a wall to create the sanctity in the space. And Rabbi Yeshua says the sanctity is there. You can sacrifice even though you don't have walls. You don't need curtains or anything. So, la vichlal Rabbi Lezer savar lo kicha, right? Sounds like, and as Rabbi Yeshua specifically says, because the sanctity remained forever. So, don't you assume that Rabbi Lezer disagrees on that point? And then it's the same machloket? No. Amalei Ravina l'Rabashim imai. No, that's not the machloket. You misunderstood Rabbi Lezer's position. Dilma dekule alma kedusha rishona kicha l'shatav kicha l'tilavo. The sanctity was there forever. Umar my Yishmael kamar, Umar my Yishmael kamar. They each just heard about, they had a tradition about what happened when they rebuilt the temple. This one heard that they put up curtains, and that one heard they didn't put up curtains. Okay, which mostly resolved our issue, but so then what was the purpose of the klaim? And as we assumed the curtains were to designate the space. But if the space anyway had sanctity, what was it for? Let's new to ba'alma, just so that people didn't see the kohanim doing what they were doing inside. Okay, because even while they were building, they were sacrificing, and they didn't want people to be looking at everything. And in general, there were walls. So since they didn't have walls, they put up a curtain. Okay, Itmar, last thing for today. Hamaleh ve'ein bo kazayit, ve'etzem mashlimo lekazayit. Another machlok of Rish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan. If you offer it outside, but you offer less than a kazayit. But with the bone, it actually gets to a kazayit. So the bone normally doesn't need to be burned, but if you burn outside a piece of meat with the bone all together, it's an olive bulk, are you liable? Because you're not liable unless there's a kazayit. Rabbi Yochanan amar chayav, Rish Lakish amar patur. So Rabbi Yochanan amar chayav, chiburei olin ka'olim damu. Anything connected to the ola is like the ola itself, and therefore it'll all count as one. Rish Lakish amar patur, chiburei olim lav ka'olim damu. Okay, he says it's not considered connected to anything connected to it, right? It has to be the flesh that you offer a kazayit of to be liable, and you didn't, so you're not. Okay, quick review. We finished the last proof for what's the asara for shchutei chutz. Then we got into, okay, what's the source for hala'ah, right? Hala'ah, bachutz, and if you slaughter it outside and then offered it outside, how do we get that? We had three things, right? Three possibilities, which mostly got rejected. Then we got to what's the source for sprinkling the blood outside that you're liable. How do we know that kometz and right the other Mishna coming up, that kometz and accepting the blood, you're not liable if you did it outside? Then we had the machlok of Rabbi Yavav and Rabbi about what if you did a combination of actions of zrika and shchitur, zrika and hala'ah, would you be liable one or two? And depending on that machlok of Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish, where the source is from. Then we got to these drashot on what you learn from Bamachaneh, Chutz Lamachaneh, and Petach Moed, why you need all three, and what that tells you about which areas are you're chayav and which you're not. And we had a machlok at Ula and Rava about that. And then we got to these two machlokot of Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish. The first one, which was based on kedusha rishona kichala lati lavo or not. Okay, was it nullified in the destruction of the temple, and that affects whether you say if I offer it outside today, am I liable or not? And then the last machloket was, what if it didn't have a kazayit, but there was a bone? Does the bone count to get it to a kazayit to say you're liable or not? Another machloket, Rabbi Yochanan Rish Lakish. That we finished for today. Wishing everyone a good day and a easy fast.